renewable energy. I was going to ask you a proper question about your priorities and how you're meeting those priorities and goals, but I thought maybe the best, most entertaining way to start would be to ask you, what is the most interesting thing that you're working on right now?
That's a hard question. I would need probably more than our allocated time to really talk through everything, but
I'll give you 100 seconds.
100 seconds, sufficient. We are working on sustainable aviation fuels. We are putting together hydrogen hubs across the country. We're working on zero-emission, heavy-duty fuel opportunities for long-duration trucking. We're working on building opportunities for low-income and low and moderate-income families. I think probably of all of that, the most exciting thing to me is the administration's focus on environmental and energy justice opportunities. And really the thing that I'm most passionate about is working across all those technologies to really focus on people who have been forgotten in our energy economy to date. And that's the thing that really drives me day to day and my colleagues.
That's great. On environmental justice and building out renewable energy in lower income neighborhoods, ABHISHEK, your company co-finances and implements solar panels, electric heat pumps in low income neighborhoods. I'm really curious to know what the biggest blocker is, the biggest barrier that you feel like you consistently come across. Is it a lack of awareness on the part of residents and landlords about laws that are already on the books? Is it fears about financing something like putting a solar panel on a roof? What do you consistently find to be the biggest blocker when you start these conversations with people in neighborhoods?
Yeah, Derek, you kind of pointed out to the two most important things. One is awareness. People are not aware like what a heat pump is. What are the different kind of ordinances in their cities that mandate heat pumps or reductions in their emissions for different portfolios. The other one you touched upon is financing. Definitely upfront cost of capital to install these newer, deeper technologies is a barrier. Our company does provide that, but it's like we have to do so much more to kind of be a part of this bigger energy transition. The last point I would mention is, I think, workforce development. There's a big skill gap in terms of people, blue-collar or white-collar workers doing this kind of work of installing or implementing heat pumps. So a lot of contractors need to learn or upskill themselves on this. So those are the three main areas, I would say, where like we need some kind of push in this industry. Yeah.
Tell me how you solve the financing piece. So BlocPower initiates a conversation with a resident or a landlord, and you talk about the benefits, the long-term benefits of electric heat pumps and solar panels. And they might say, yeah, I guess I believe you about the long-term benefits. I know it's good for the planet, but I don't have the cash right now. I'm not liquid enough. I cannot make this investment. There's 1,000 other things that are burning in the world, and I just can't put enough energy and focus into this. What's the next thing that you say?
We say you don't have to care about financing. We'll borrow the money from the lenders. We will design and install it to optimize it for your house or for your building or your portfolio, and we would operate and maintain it throughout the life cycle. So it's basically like a car lease with the operation and maintenance included. So you're paying for like a new equipment through the savings that you get, and you pay like just like a car lease, your lease payments every year. And that's how like our company kind of helps like with the revenue model works that way. Yeah.
Great. So from solar panels and heat pumps to hydro, hydropower is the second largest source of renewable energy in the US. Tell me a little bit about your company, ECOWAVE Power, how the technology works and where you're operating, who you're providing power to right now.
So our company developed a unique innovative technology for a generation of clean electricity from ocean and sea waves. Our technology is completely different from what has been done before. 99% of the wave energy developers have decided to operate in the offshore, which is 4 or 5 kilometers into the sea. We attach to existent man-made structures such as breakwaters, piers, jetties, and other types of structures. The good thing about it is that we don't use any prime real estate. We just use the breakwaters. They're there just to break the waves. The breakwaters themselves are not really environmentally friendly, of course, because cement in the water is not the friendliest thing you can do, but you have to construct it in order to protect the ports and the local populations. So we take these bulky, huge structures, which are not used for anything, and turn them to a source of clean electricity by connecting floaters to them that go up and down with the movement of the waves and generate clean electricity.
And tell me where you're operating and any new developments in terms of where you're operating right now in the world.
So we opened our first grid-connected power station in Gibraltar, and we're also opening a second one in Israel, which will be the first time in the Israeli history that wave energy will officially connect to the national electrical grid.
Wow.
In January this year, we signed an agreement with Alta Sea in the port of Los Angeles, thereby bringing the first onshore wave energy technology to be grid connected to the United States, after the DOE has spoken and worked a lot for it, for bringing wave energy and commercializing it. And another amazing news that I have is that actually we're working with the Assemblyman Robert Karabinchak from New Jersey, who is promoting a legislation bill that will be published tomorrow or the next day, including wave energy to the Energy Master Plan of Governor Murphy for the state of New Jersey. This is the first time that any states in the US will officially legislate for wave energy.
Wow.
According to the, just one last thing, I know we're
Go right
on time.
ahead. I'm not interrupting. that was just an interjected wow. Yeah.
Okay. So according to the United States Energy Information Administration, wave energy can provide 66% of all the United States energy needs. So if President Biden is serious about his commitment of zero carbon emissions by 2050, solar and wind, which are amazing sources, are not enough. Let's bring wave energy, let's legislate for it, let's implement it, and then we can be in a much better place.
I would agree.
Thank you.
Rebecca, back to you. What are the biggest challenges in terms of scaling and transmitting the energy that we're generating? We talked a little bit here about implementation, solar panels, hydropower, but transmission is a huge, the deployment of transmission is a huge part of this as well. What is the Biden administration doing on building and transmitting renewable energy?
Well, there's almost two questions there. The first is around scale, and that really is a policy focus insofar as figuring out how do we ensure that government doesn't get into the way of developers looking to accelerate the pace of technology? How do we ensure that we've streamlined the access of that technology into government so that we can create government as a client and really help with that scale? So that's more of a market question. On the transmission side of things, right, I think the state of New York actually is an excellent case study of what can be done, right? NYSERDA and as well as the city of New York has just instituted some of the largest offshore wind sales. The transmission of those lines will be coming in through substations out on Long Island, through Suffolk and Nassau County, to really come into Zone J, which is the city of New York, which has the highest need. So the question then becomes, as we think about transmission connectivity, how can we really get out into the community, into the public, and say, these things are necessary, they help, as Ina so adroitly pointed out, in addition to hydropower, which is an excellent base source of transmission, clean generation, solar and wind, we really need to accelerate the pacing around and the development around. So we will need to people need to be willing to let their communities embrace clean generation, right? And that also helps to advance the hastening of additional transmission lines.
I'm really interested in, especially in the first half of what you said, the market problem, because I think there's a lot of people who appreciate in an abstract kind of way that the US needs to do more, decarbonize, build solar and wind and da-ba-da-ba-da. But when it comes right down to, can we build solar here? Can we build wind here? Can we build hydro here? They say, not there, that's my neighborhood. Not there, that's my backyard, that's my view. And so this abstract preference for decarbonization runs up against the acute preference for nothing to be built anywhere around where these people live. And these people can be conservatives, they can be liberals, they can be moderates. Sometimes I think this NIMBYism has no partisan monopoly. How do you overcome that? I mean, I know this is the hard question, one of many, I suppose. This is a really hard question, I know, and you're working at the national level, and so you're not necessarily fighting the trench war in Los Angeles and New York and New England. But what is your theory for how to overcome that resistance?
Well, I used to work in the trenches with both the city and state of New York, so I feel somewhat obliged to defend. But I mean, there's two pieces here, right? If you look at Europe, if you look at most of Western Europe, I think that there has been an appreciation for wind turbines and solar farms in their backyard. I think it's just a matter of changing the tides and thinking about how we can really create public enthusiasm around clean generation. Quite frankly, the current situation, I think, in Ukraine has really put a very fine point on the ideal opportunities of domestic manufacturing, domestic production, domestic generation, in a way that perhaps we would not have had without that conflict. It ideally wouldn't be happening, but I think it has put a very fine point on this energy transition. And then, you know, to the second part of your question, so NIMBYism, I think, is pervasive, but we also have seen historic systemic racism, right? In people saying, no, this is, no, I don't want this here, put it over there. And low-income communities have really, I think, been the underserved communities have really been the folks who have had to bear the burden of public health issues that are consistent with peaker plants. We see that right here in Queens. Issues around connectivity and browning out in peak summer and winter seasons. So thinking through, you know, what does environmental justice really mean to us, and how can we continue to center the fact that we need to do this as a collective whole and not negatively impact certain communities over others.
ABHISHEK, what could you use from the local or national government to make your job easier?
I think awareness. The federal government has invested in solar or heat pumps, what basically BlocPower does heavily. They have mandated specific ordinances around like subsidies for these kind of newer technologies. But if I take a step back and think high level, I think there needs to be some regulation around how I would say utilities kind of make their money. Primarily, I think this has been the generic case for utilities making money from sales volume. The more kilowatt hours you sell, the more money you make. I think few markets have started to change that. New York, Illinois, Minnesota. These markets have tried to take the revenue model away from sales volume to more like performance-based. So if you're investing in reduction in emissions, then the wholesale market regulators can actually define something that will help you, like with your revenue model as such. So, and I'm trying to think of, I think Hawaii is the only state that has legally defined it, where they have to classify how much revenue comes from capital investment and how much comes from like performance-based, or I would say rate making and other kind of revenue models. So I would think a shift is needed in that area. If the question was like one thing, I would go there. But I do think it has to come from the top, like not only from the private sector, but also from the public sector. The public sector is doing its part. Like the Biden administration has invested in this and is promising around $40 billion of investment into decarbonization in general. So it's on the private market to kind of catch up right now, yeah.
If those utility changes happen, as an end consumer of energy, does that affect, how does that affect bills in the short term? How does it affect the way that people see the energy that they're using, or see savings in the shorter versus long term? Like what's the end consumer sort of cash out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you say performance-based regulation, it comes to the value for the customer. I live in New York. Every year, or more or less every summer or winter, there's like 4 to 5% hike in your energy prices. Recently, a utility increased its price by 10% or more, and that's what changes. That's how it changes. Where like, yeah, if you're only making capital investments, yes, it'll go down to the customer. It'll trickle it down to the customer. But if you're making other kinds of performance-based regulations or policies, maybe the value to the customer is much more, whether it's a reduction in your energy bills, or it may be like credits. You can participate more in demand response and those kind of things, individual customers, and make money out of it. So I think there are opportunities out there, and that's where the shift has to be. So yeah, I think for the end customer, I think it's bang for buck. It's like reduction in the energy bills. That's going to change if you move away from like the current status quo revenue model. Yeah.
Got it. You know, I'm curious, like, how you find clients when you're going around the world and trying to figure out, you know, where can we build, you know, this technology in order to use ocean and wave currents to produce energy. What are you looking for? Because you're building in New Jersey, you're building in Los Angeles, you're building in Israel. So when you're looking at the globe, thinking, you know, where's our next customer? What's the criteria for deciding that?
So basically what we need is locations that have wave height of 50 centimeters and higher, because the technology starts operating at 50 centimeters wave heights. We're looking at ports and coastal municipalities that have breakwaters, which is most of the locations that will have waves will have breakwaters to protect the coastal populations. We're looking for locations that are open to do a new legislation, to set the policies that maybe have a supportive feed-in tariff, same like in the past there was for wind and solar, which enable their commercialization. So, but we do have the positive of having a really unique and innovative technology right now in the wave energy industry. So many times, really, we don't have to go look for the clients are approaching us. Many of the ports, unfortunately, the ports are one of the most polluting entities in the world in terms of their carbon footprint because of the shipping industry and so on. So all of them have the agenda and the desire to become a green port. And in order to do that, what's easier for a port than to install wave energy? They have a breakwater, which they don't use for anything. They spend a lot of money to renovate the breakwater every single year because it gets eroded by the power of the waves. So they just give us the breakwater, we fund the power station, we connect the floaters on the external part. Not only we're producing them clean electricity, we're creating workplaces, we're creating a whole new industry around it in the port, we're branding the port as a green port. So basically, and a new source of revenues for the port from the breakwater. And new studies are even showing that when you cover the breakwater with floaters, the external side, you minimize the effect of coastal erosion and breakwaters erosion. So you're also saving the money in renovating this breakwater that they don't use for anything. So the ports are quite happy with the solution.
Right. No, yeah, it sounds like a win-win-win. As you're looking at all these different countries to build in, are there any ways, and I know that state-by-state regulations can be different in the US, but is there any way in which the US you find is harder to build in than a place like Israel or some other country that you're operating in?
It's not harder to build, it's just that the United States started its legislative efforts a bit later than anybody else in wave energy specifically. Right now we're mostly focused in Israel because we're an Israeli company, but in terms of continents, Europe and the United States, Europe because it has the most advanced legislation, policies, legal framework for wave energy and the most grants that are being granted to the blue economy and to wave energy in general. The United States is because it's a country that everybody looks up to. When you do something in the United States and you do it well, everybody will follow. So definitely we're interested in the United States. Also, again, 66% of the energy can be provided from the power of the wave. That's a huge market potential for us. So I think that, again, all countries are interesting. Right now we're focusing in Europe and the United States because of the clear advantages.
That's great. There's been a lot of questions from the audience coming in, so I'm going to start taking some of these. Matt asks, anything that takes energy from an environment, wind, tidal, has a downstream effect on that environment, weather, biology, which we are already starting to see in areas downwind of the massive California mountain ridge wind farms. Any comments on that?
Regarding wave energy specifically, we made a number of environmental studies, and the specific technology that we used does not create any negative footprint on the environment, because as opposed to offshore wave energy or tidal, we don't connect to the ocean floor. We only connect to existing man-made structures which already change the ecological balance. They already destroy the environment. So we just take something that kind of harmed the environment and turn it to a source of clean electricity. We also use biodegradable fluid in our accumulators. So even if you have a spill, fish can eat the fluid. So that's good. You know, nothing bad can be caused by the actual power station. So if you use the right technologies, I don't think that they should have a kind of a negative part on the environment.
Any other comment on sort of some of the environmental spillover effects of this kind of technology?
There's no question that siting is one of the most important facets of any sort of development of clean generation projects. I think that as a whole, as a collective nation, both the states and federal projects have gotten much better around siting so that it has a minimal to no negative environmental impact. There's no question, though, that with the pace and scale of the number of projects that are starting to multiply, we may see some other environmental impacts, and I think some of that will have to be mitigated as we go. Unfortunately, there's no kind of silver bullet solution to any of this. We see differing pros and cons of impacts across all types of energy and environmental work. So the question is, what is our level of tolerance, and how can we really understand what the framework for that tolerance is so that the pros consistently outweigh the cons and our negative impacts are minimized to the greatest opportunity.
Great. We have time for about 2 more questions. I can either go to this sitting audience or go to the virtual screen. We have a question right here, if someone can run a mic to this aisle.
Something that I'm missing is how do we reduce what we use? How do we become more efficient with our energy? I hear a lot about how do we produce it, but how do we need less of it? How do we need less plastic? So if anybody could address that, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. The question is about efficiency of use, not just decarbonization of the energy sources. Anyone can take that one.
Yeah, I can take it up. Specific to the build environment, I'm going to start there and probably go into more higher level, like other transportation or other things. In the built environment, most of the industrial cities, take a look at New York, it's like everything was built before 1960s. It was like pre-war or even post-war buildings. These buildings need some infrastructural improvements per se, whether it be on the envelope side, like weather stripping it, or insulation-wise, or there can be other things like the new things that have come out as the passive housing techniques that you can put in like newer buildings. Most of the times, this is a luxury that commercial real estate Class A, Class B buildings get to afford, but not generally mostly single family or 1 to 4 family homes that are spread out like brownstones all around New York. So the company that I work for, BlocPower, tries to take this holistic approach. We don't only look at like switching out like a fossil fuel appliance with an all-electric appliance, even if it's like 400% more efficient. We also look at like how the envelope reacts to like convective heat rather than radiative heat from your steam baseboards or radiators. So, and then controls play into picture too. How like every building is different from the other building. So we do put in smart controls to kind of react real time to like what the customer preferences are, who wants what temperatures, what's the humidity, air quality comes into picture too. So those are quite a few areas, I would say, to pinpoint. I think the low-hanging fruits is always going to be weather stripping, caulking, insulation. And then apart from that, I think newer technologies like heat pumps, it can also be like your induction cook stoves. They're much more efficient than your gas cook stoves, less polluting per se as well. And also your water heaters too. Your water heaters are they're powered by fossil fuel sources. You can switch it up to all electric ones and they're always more efficient. So, but that way you would reduce your building site intensity per se, both in terms of emissions and also in terms of energy. So that's one way to think about it from the building sector. I think from the transportation sector, we're already seeing that, like EV vehicles like are so much more efficient. Your IC engine was developed in the 1950s. It's like 30% or 40% at max efficient. So yeah, we're seeing it in like quite a few sectors, like transportation and building. But for other sectors on the supply chain, I think you brought up plastic. Maybe others are more suited to speak on that than me.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to finish with that. But thank you all very, very much. I appreciate it. And thanks to this panel.